This week, Matt Alderman is on vacation, so Jason and I will be taking over the show this week with our first special guest, James Gomez, CISO at CyberSec, joining us to discuss cybersecurity and integrated risk management. In the leadership and communication segment, we discuss the creative mindset, CMMC challenges, work from home security is still lacking security, you may not get it right the first time, reaching your goals, increasing productivity with music, tackling bottlenecks, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Week. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Arduous legacy GRC systems cannot support the powerful real-time automation and oversight that organizations require to take risks that matter and compete in today's business climate. CyberSaint ingests data from your existing tech stack to deliver unprecedented, patented automation and visibility into enterprise risk and compliance. Don't get left behind. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs and business leaders of Fortune 500 and more partner with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today by visiting securityweekly.com/CyberSaint BSW. As a security leader, CYBRARY for Teams was built to make your job easier. Are you struggling to measure your team's skills proficiency, provide critical or relevant role-based training, or translate training investments into meaningful business outcomes? CYBRARY for Teams is the industry's #1 NIST-aligned DoD 8140 and 8570 compliance certification and skills training platform. 96% of the Fortune 500 have employees training on CYBRARY. CYBRARY for Teams. Skills development solved. Visit cybrary.it/solved to solve your training problems. With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. It's episode number 197, recorded on November 23rd, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. Matt Alderman is out on vacation this week. Joining me remotely is Jason Albuquerque. Jason, welcome.
Hey there, Paul. I'm coming down my second half of quarantine.
Yes, that's right. You are unable to join us in studio, even if we were able to socially distance and have cigars.
That is absolutely
socially
correct.
Distance cigars together in studio. There will be a time soon we can get back.
Very soon. Everything has worked out fine. Tests come back negative. Now it's just kind of going through the motions.
It's just a waiting game. Yeah. Quick announcements. Security Weekly, in partnership with the Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. The inaugural edition of Security Weekly Unlocked is also celebrating Security Weekly's 15-year anniversary and will feature talks from Ron and Cindy Gula, Kevin Finisterre, Vivek Ramachandran, and so many more. Make sure you go check out the agenda. Complete with a whole bunch of sponsored sessions as well, which is going to be super. I'm looking forward to all the talks as well as the guided demos that will come from our sponsors that you will know and recognize as well. SecurityWeekly.com/unlocked is where you go to register for this completely free event. James Gomez is the Chief Information Security Officer at CyberSec with over 35 years of IT, risk management, and compliance experience. He joins us today to discuss cybersecurity and integrated risk management. James, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be here.
Nice to have you, James. If you wouldn't mind starting and just telling us how you got your start in information security.
That's actually probably the second question I always get asked, and the first one is, what do you do? And then the second one is, how did you get in? But I started out as a developer and dating myself a little bit. I started doing assembler code out of college. And And, it took me a little bit of time. I did some database administration, some project management, software development. And then probably about 20 years ago, I got into some compliance work after I got out of business school. And, that's been the journey. So probably about the last 20 years, I've been doing compliance and risk management. And lately, the last few years, just been focusing on cybersecurity. So it's been a pretty interesting journey.
Yeah. How did you come to be a CISO?
Well, it's kind of interesting because the way it started is I kind of started out doing risk management and doing compliance kind of engagements as a consultant. And how it works is typically if you do a good enough job, what happens is that someone will say, well, you're great as a consultant. How about actually signing on and doing some real work for us? And that's actually how I got into the field. Is I started out as a consultant and Fortune 500 company, and the next thing I know, about a year later, I was their chief information security officer. So that's kind of how I got started. It was something where I can't say that I necessarily planned it. I mean, who plans to be a CISO? But it's one of those things that that kind of just fell into place. So
yeah, it's kind of funny, some of the journeys that I hear from CISOs, and a lot of times it's not your traditional journey into the space, right? It's not something that you sat back and said, someday I'm going to be a CISO. Some people do, but a lot of folks, I think it's grown organically just by their experience, getting aligned with the business, knowing how to manage risk, the technical components, right? So it's really that culmination of skill sets that positions you for the role.
Right. And, it's interesting because what I found is probably after about being in IT for about 5 years, I kind of found myself trying to get away from IT. And it was because, back in the day when I first got into IT, it was kind of the job where they threw you in a corner and they threw pizza under the door every once in a while. And, I would go into a cube and write code for hours and hours and hours at a time. And I kind of found out that I liked people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to necessarily be writing code for the rest of my life. And that was kind of how I tried. So ever since then, I've gotten in and out, into technology, out of technology, into technology, out of technology. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I went to business school, was to try to get away from technology. And I got out, and the first thing I did is I got right back into technology. So it's kind of like that line from that movie. Every time I try to get away, you pull me back in. So it's been kind of one of those journeys,
James, what is CyberSec, and what is the kind of role and challenges you have at CyberSec today?
Well, we are a boutique consulting company, and essentially what we do is that we do the basic three, which is cybersecurity, risk management, and compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest thing that we do, and some of the things that we've been focusing on the last couple of years, has been in the mindset of looking at engagements with our clients from the perspective of risk management. And, it's interesting because I think when you look at risk management in and of itself, it's kind of one of those things that is a necessary requirement, or, some people would say evil. But it's one of those things that, it's something that we have to do because, there are people in the boardroom or people at the executive level that are telling us that this is what we need to do. But in reality, it's something that can drive and should drive your cybersecurity program and your compliance program. So that's kind of some of the things that we've been looking at over the last couple of years, is moving in towards that organizational view for our clients.
James, do you find that do customers come to you that really have not started on the journey of having a cybersecurity program or risk management or compliance? Like they're coming in like, hey, we need to build this from the ground up. Does that happen?
Yeah, and we've had customers and clients. I mean, we do a little bit of, private work, and what I mean by private companies, but there's and public companies, but there's also the government companies or organizations that are DoD or DHS, those kinds of organizations, where they're looking at, okay, we've got this set of compliance rules that should drive what we're doing, and that may be they may have to comply to NIST or FIPS or FISMA or CNSSI 1253. And so typically what they're doing is that they're going through and they're kind of, they've siloed their organization. They have people in IT that are looking at and doing cybersecurity tools. And then they have some compliance people that are over here that are saying, okay, we need to get in compliance, or we're not going to get this government contract, or we're going to be, there's going to be a problem with our compliance issues, whether it's HIPAA or what have you. And then there's organizations that have said, okay, well, we've got this compliance stuff that we have to do over here on this side, and we've got this risk management over here, but how do we drive all three of those into one cohesive program? And that program drives and tells us the tools that we need to implement based upon the categories of tools that are out there. And I'm sure you know this. I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are a ton of tools that are out there. So as a CISO or a CIO, someone may not necessarily say, well, how do I create a roadmap, and how is that roadmap going to be strategic? So that's really the challenge, is making sure that roadmap is strategic. And risk management, or IRM, the new category of tools, and it's not new, but it's something that's been out there for a while. Integrated risk management is one of those tool categories that are out there that should really be driving your cybersecurity tool roadmap.
Yeah, I've met with companies and they're in the exact same boat as you described, right? They've grown to a certain point where they can get contracts, and all of a sudden the people that they're contracting with are like, so you need to show us that you actually have a cybersecurity program and can meet these various compliance standards before we can do business together. And I think many organizations in that position are like, oh wait, I need help. Like, where do I start? How do I identify? I mean, I don't know how you particularly approach it, James, but I typically start asking them about, okay, what are your critical business processes? What are your critical assets? What compliance standards are we going towards? And starting to put a plan together. Typically, where do you start in that conversation, James? Because I almost find that the challenge is like picking a starting point when they're at that point where they really have very little in terms of a formal program.
It's a great question. And, kind of one of the places where we start is we really start, and I'm going to use this analogy, and it's kind of quirky, but because of COVID, I think it's apropos. I find that a lot of people that are in COVID lockdown, different things like that, they do a lot of baking. That's the big thing these days, right? It's baking. And what I say is risk management is like the recipe. Baking the cake, putting together all the ingredients, that's the cybersecurity tool. And then compliance is the oven in your mouth, which determines whether what you did in those previous two steps actually came out to be what it's supposed to be. And, if you don't have a recipe, the fact is that it's like you can come up with, you can get a whole bunch of stuff. You can come up with tortillas, bread, whatever. But if you want to bake a chocolate cake, or a German chocolate cake, one of my favorites, you would start with a recipe. And so that's what cybersecurity does, is that one of the first steps is going through and looking at what compliance program are you supposed to be applying to your organization. So if I'm in healthcare, it's HIPAA. But most practitioners that I know, they don't go through and implement HIPAA. Why? Because it's fairly aggressive and it takes a long time. So organizations, and what we've done before in the past with HIPAA organizations or healthcare organizations, is we go through and implement NIST 800 171. It's a good place to start. Smaller set of controls, but those controls transfer over to and are applicable in the HIPAA world. So you do that in the first phase or circle or cycle, if you will. And then the next phase, you go in and you do a gap analysis, and you find those controls that you didn't catch in NIST 800 171. that are in HIPAA, and then you apply those. And then to even make it additionally complicated, we've had organizations where they have to have PCI because they're taking credit cards in their cafeteria and in their parking garage. So you've got 3 frameworks that you have to apply, and going through and applying all of those, you would probably do, and what we've typically done is we apply PCI last. But that's one of the things that we do. But our first step in our risk assessment is 2 things: applications inventory and asset inventory. Those are the 2 key things, because you cannot secure what you don't know. We've worked in organizations where they've got shadow apps, they've got servers in labs that have research data in them that are critical to the business, and nobody knows about them. So the key thing is gathering a list, a validated list of all of your assets, and you can use a risk discovery tool, asset discovery tool for that. And then, like I said, going through and gathering a list of all your software assets. So it's hardware and software. Those are the 2 biggest key things, because then the next step is going through, after you gather and figured out what your risk management framework is, applying those controls to those assets or those data tools.
And James, to your point, to stick to your analogy, right, about cooking and recipes, to some degree, you're going to have those core ingredients that you always use, but sometimes you're going to have to, put the spices into taste, because not every organization's built the same. So not every control within a framework is going to be applicable to every organization. And then the other side too is portioning. How many people are you feeding, right? So, typically when I walk into these situations and I'm working with customers, it's getting to know them as an organization. It's getting to know their risk appetite. It's getting to know their culture. Part of that is really getting to know the business as you apply these controls and figuring out what's applicable to what level. Exactly.
I think the first time I did this, I did it for a small aerospace company called Boeing. And what we did with them is exactly the same thing. It was COSO, it was COBIT, and it was before COBIT and COSO was even a word and nobody even knew what it was. But what I learned from that particular experience is exactly what you just said. It's about learning what the risk appetite is, and learning, 10,000 plus, well, they actually more than that, several 100,000 employees, if you will. How do you go through and apply all of those controls? And making sure that you're not being overly aggressive, because that's one thing that can happen, is that being overly aggressive in risk management can stop your business, which is a little bit of what they experienced. And it was because nobody had really applied COSO or COBIT to any businesses at that time, because Sarbanes-Oxley was one of those things that was relatively new. So you are 100% right with that assessment. So,
but I like the approach, James, because I think mistakenly sometimes I try and go after data and the user roles first, but I like having a map first of where my assets are, both physically and where my software apps are, because I think that leads you into, if you see the list of apps that people are using, you're like, wait, why do you use this app and that app? And then they go, oh, that data either I create or get from here, and that flows into that app. Then you get a better understanding of your data. So I like your approach a lot. Is that typically your flow as well?
Yes. And it's one of those things that I think organizations oftentimes, with their asset inventory, especially on the software side, what we've experienced is that most organizations don't necessarily have one place where they're categorizing all of their software, especially if there's multiple business units. And what you'll find is that we've walked into organizations where one business unit is using one piece of software and they have several licenses. Some of them are unused. And you go into the other organization, they have exactly the same software with a certain set of licenses, and those are unused. And consolidating is one of those things where, we've seen organizations save not hundreds of thousands, but millions of dollars in their annual budgets, because, it's great to be able to walk into a CIO's office and say, hey, look, you're spending $50 million on software, and the reality is you only need to be spending 25. And we've seen those numbers become that real before.
I'm sure accounting helps you with that, but accounting typically doesn't pick up on that because the accountants are siloed off. Is that sounds like the reason?
Yes, and especially and because each one of those business units are typically they are reporting numbers up to the mothership, if you will, the parent company, and they don't necessarily look at, oh, we've got 2 copies of the same software, and and it's even interesting because Gartner has a statistic that says that 80% of the software that out there is typically only utilized as low as 20%. So if you think about that number and you look at that as far as software cost is concerned, it can be an astronomical number.
Absolutely. But that's a security challenge that most of us have right now, myself included, is just getting a hold of what technologies are in use and how they're used, and then integrating and consolidating to tell the story of where we're at with the CRA today, right? That's an active exercise that we're doing. And it's amazing doing that study today versus years ago, because it's so easy for people to spin up all, their own services. And it makes that very challenging.
Yeah. And I'll say too, Paul and James, is on the infrastructure side, right? A lot of the challenges we're seeing with our customers is not knowing carrier services, internet connections, old antiquated POTS lines, all of these carrier services that over the course of the years and years have just compiled over each other and just built on each other. And now they're starting to come in and say, let's do audits on what we have because we don't even know what we have for carrier services. And think about that. Those are active threat vectors that may exist that nobody knows about.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's one of those things I think that we don't necessarily keep in our mind as much as we should, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I like the next logical step, as we touched on briefly, was then, like, once you've got a map of your assets, start identifying your data and who's using those and the roles, responsibilities of the data, how the data is stored, how it's moved in transit, who needs access to it. Is that typically your next step? And is there compliance standards that help us with, kind of map that out, and or, classes of technology and software to help us with that mapping? Because I feel like that's really important.
It is, and that's what we typically do. There are a lot of good automated tools out there that actually can help and assist with your asset inventory, both physical and software. So we typically would go through and deploy a tool that would help us gain lists. And then especially when you're working with something like NIST 800, whether it's, not necessarily 171, but 53 actually kind of has some controls embedded within one of the control families that has to do with systems flows. And so it helps map out those system flows and helps go through and determine what the interdependencies between multiple applications. And that's a valuable thing to know as well, especially when you're talking about things like, I noticed one of our previous one of the previous commercials that was put forward here was ExtraHop. ExtraHop is one of those tools that can help and go through and digest and help with the network. But there's other pieces as well too, especially when you're talking about network segmentation. Palo Alto Networks is one of those tools that's very good to help with the network segmentation. And it's one of the key initiatives that we find that's vitally important in securing the network, because it helps in minimizing the threat kill chain and helping and preventing a hacker from getting in to the network and going and moving sideways. If your network is segmented and you've got zero trust implemented, that segmented network where the Palo Alto is in front of, it has to be that zero trust requires that that user be re-authenticated before it gets past that Palo Alto.
James, I like this approach, because what you've kind of laid out, and you've helped me think slightly differently about it. Because now, based on what we've discussed, I can go, I want email protection. Who are the users that are accessing the most sensitive data? Let's make sure they get the most training or whatever. And then you talk about vulnerability management and configuration management. Now I can apply those to the areas of the business that may have the most risk or pose the most impact if they were attacked.
You're right. And, I think that one of the things, and I noticed here's another thing that I noticed at the beginning of the program, there was also a talk about a tool, which is integrated risk management tools. And if you notice, let's just talk about cybersecurity tools for a minute. If you go through and look at the number of tools that are out there, it is mind-boggling. And the reason why is obviously because this is projected to go to $1 trillion plus market, right? But if I'm a CISO, where do I buy the tools, and how much of those tools am I going to have to spend? And that's the difference between doing something where it's tactical. I'm going through and trying to solve a whole bunch of tactical issues versus, I may not only have 10 fingers, right? So you're trying to plug all these holes with all your 10 fingers versus actually going through and systematically choosing logical tools based upon where the gaps are in the risk assessment that you've completed. And then those are based upon risk, right? So, in NIST 853, as a classic example, they have high impact, medium impact, and low impact controls. So typically what we would do is that we would go in and we would implement the high impact controls and implement those controls that have given us an indication that they have some issues or gaps with them. So that would drive your cybersecurity roadmap. But here's where I think integrated risk management can help with some of this. What if, and this is where I actually believe this is going to be one of the top 5 security trends for 2021 is going to be integrated risk management. And integrated risk management, not in the terms of where we've thought about it before, where we're talking about going and implementing a GRC. A GRC is not an integrated risk management tool. An integrated risk management tool actually goes through and looks at your assets and determines whether those assets are in compliance. Let's just say I have a firewall and I have implemented some firewall rules that are going to open up a port or a protocol that shouldn't be opened in that particular network segmentation. Well, in theory, there should be an alert that goes to a SIM. But what if you took that alert and not only applied it to the SIM dashboard, what if you took it and you applied it to what I call a RIM, a risk integrated management tool, or an IRM? That, I think, is the next generation of risk management. And I think that that's one of the things that I see as the tool, the place where organizations can take this information, walk it into a boardroom and say, look, these are the controls that we have in place. This SIM is telling us these are all the issues that are in existence in our infrastructure. But that next level is going through and looking at our controls and saying these controls are not working effectively because these are the things that we're experiencing in our infrastructure at this time. And let's face it, as CISOs, what we typically do is that when we have a board meeting with the executives or a CIO meeting, and they say, what's our cybersecurity program look like? We go through, we generate a whole bunch of data. And by the time we give that data to the board, it's already antiquated. It is several days, several weeks old. And that's where I think integrated risk management helps as well.
And what I like about your strategy, James, is that I think oftentimes we walk into the boardroom and the board is expecting, and maybe we're geared up to say, hey, I need another like $10 million in my budget. But when you do this study, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to find some things that can remediate a lot of risk that don't really cost a lot, right? Yeah. It may be process change. All it is a process change. It doesn't require we go buy something else. I think the security, vendors have really kind of pushed us. If that's where you're going to first, they're going to, you spend money with us. I think to be effective, you don't have to spend a whole ton of money, especially up front when you're first doing this study.
Yeah, Paul, I couldn't agree more. And James, that strategy is awesome. I honestly feel it is the future. But what I would add to that is, when we think of assets within our organization, it's not just the technologies, right? It's the people and it's the processes. For example, the people, are you dealing with contractors? Third-party risk management is going to be huge, right? When you're dealing with third-party vendors who are integrated into your operations, the processes within all of your business units, are they adding additional risk? So it's those type of items, I think, combined with the technical aspect that's going to bring that level of context to your board or your C-suite, where you can make strategic decisions for your organization to better secure your business?
100%. 100%. I have one particular client, and they have 3,000 plus vendors, third-party vendors, and they have a manual effort where they have to certify each and every one of these 3,000 vendors every year. And it's a core part of their business. Mm-hmm. So think about that. They have to go through and figure out, first of all, do they have an SSP? Do they actually have a security program in place? Do they have disaster recovery in place? Do they have a SOC 1, or have they had or completed a SOC 1 or a SOC 2? They're doing all that stuff manually right now. So putting it into a risk management program, and there's two pieces, right? In an integrated risk management program, there's going to be some controls that are going to be what I'll call technical controls, where you gather the data either from a primary source or a secondary source. And then there's those controls where you're going to take the data based upon interrogatory types of data gathering, where you sit down with the CISO from this third-party organization and say, okay, here's your ICQ, here's the list of the questions you need to answer. And, it's kind of one of those things. It's a yes or no. Do you have this? Yes or no. Do you have this? Yes or no. And if you do, provide the evidence for that. That's the old auditor in me looking at it and saying, well, if I'm going to go through and audit somebody, I'm going to want to not only just take your word for it, I'm going to want to look at the hardcore evidence. And that's going to be, one of the key things that we look at when we look at these organizations is, have they had a SOC 1 or a SOC 2 completed? So you're 100% right with that assessment.
Awesome. Jason, final questions for James?
Good to go. No, this has been awesome. Thanks for joining us, James.
Yeah, James, thank you for appearing on Business Security Weekly this week. Great discussion.
Thank you. Very good. I'm glad to be here.
Stay tuned. Thank you, James. Stay tuned. Leadership and communication articles coming up next, including bathroom time management strategies. Stay tuned.